I am Dave the Amateur Magus. On this channel I talk all about the mechanics behind ceremonial magic, occultism, esotericism, and the mechanics behind everything you can find within a dusty old grimoire. We're doing a bit of a weird one today, and I'm going to be talking about weather magic. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to support the channel, please subscribe to my Patreon down in the link in the description, or if you want to employ my services for an astrological reading or various consultations, you can reach out to me and we can schedule an appointment. Let's talk about weather magic, shall we? Weather magic is actually incredibly easy to do. The Taoists actually have an entire system of weather magic, which I will not be discussing because I am not qualified to talk about Taoism. However, weather magic is a fairly common and useful, in the past, goal of magic because changing the weather would mean the difference between having a drought and having rain so the crops can grow. And it also would be the difference between having a long, harsher winter where the food is starting to run dry, and it would be the difference between the sun is breaking and you can actually go hunting without it being like, negative 20 degrees and we're hunting woolly mammoths or some nonsense. Now, weather magic is actually quite interesting, because weather magic is addressed very briefly in Agrippa in the form of the winds. There are 4 different winds that you could potentially evoke in order to call up different things. However, I'm just going to tell you this now. I have never evoked the winds. Under very, very rare circumstances will I evoke the winds. That being said, if there is a storm going, and I have experienced this, if there is a storm going, and you start reciting Shakespeare's The Tempest, those winds will take it as a sign you want them to increase in intensity. As long as you have some proficiency in the occult arts. If you have magical power, this is where that will come in from. If you don't, well, unfortunately, that's not going to work. Now, the 4 winds themselves each have different temperaments based on which direction they come from, so if you are going to work with the winds in a various different, directional context, you should probably work with them in different ways. Now, these names come from the Greek. The 4 winds are Notus from the south, Boreas from the north, Zephyrus from the west, and Ereus from the east. Now, I will say again that I have never personally worked with invoking the winds for various different states of weather, but it is an option for those of you who are more inclined to work with the natural powers. The second option is going to be working directly with nature spirits, which I do have a little bit more experience with. Working with nature spirits, you're going to want to leave out offerings for nature spirits. Usually you're going to want to do this at either a crossroads, if you can get away with it, or a tree. Ideally a big, notable tree. Usually if you live in a city, every tree is notable, but generally speaking, you're going to want to leave out offerings at a tree or a crossroads for the spirits and ask them, hey, can you please make it sunny instead of the constant overcast skies? And the nature spirits, if they accept your offering, will usually do that. Usually nature spirits will enjoy various different types of fertilizer for their trees, various different types of organic things, such as like fruits, vegetables, that kind of thing. And generally speaking, nature spirits are pretty good at changing the weather because they are the spirits of the local environment, and the spirits of the local environment are pretty good at changing the temporary conditions of the local environment. That should make sense to literally everyone. However, these spirits are also capable of no-selling your weather magic. If the local spirits don't want it to, snow in July, then it's not going to snow in July because the spirits will be like, no, we're not going to make it snow in July. These are usually the spirits who are going to change the weather. Now, that snow in July will usually be converted into probably rain, let's be real. But this leads to another interesting question. Each of the 4 elements has a particular weather associated with it. Nice sunny days are typically associated with the sun, windy days are associated with wind, and rain is associated with water, obviously, and snows are associated with earth. You might be wondering, why is it associated with the element of earth? Well, it's the element of solidity, and it is also associated with freezing the waters to become solid. So that's why it's associated with the element of earth. Now, you will notice that not all of these kind of happen in the same, not every single one of these weather patterns can happen in a particular season. Sunny days can happen pretty much any time. Windy days happen any time. Rains don't. neither do snows. Snows only happen in winter and sometimes fall and early spring, but there's a time period where those weather patterns happen, and the rest of the time it switches to rain, and vice versa. It depends on where you live in the world. Now, this is why usually you're going to be wanting to work with the three elements that are actually in the sky and not on the ground, those being air, fire, and water, because air is made up of the sky. You look up, that's where air is. It's also the winds. Fire is going to be the sun. Look at the sign of Leo. Let's be honest, we're not going to argue about it being actually air. We're not going to argue about that. It's a giant ball of plasma. Plasma, the state of matter, is fire. And then water, which is rain and clouds by extension. So, because when working with the element of earth, you're really not going to affect the weather much because you're looking down and asking above to change. That is not how that works. So if you're doing this from a Western ceremonial context, what you can do is you can invoke the different elemental powers when the sun is at the particularly correct spot in the day. So if you want sunny days, you could do it when it is noon. And here's where we get a little bit, controversial. You should be invoking the sun while you do this because the sun is technically the planetary power that corresponds to all the weather phenomenon on Earth as well, because the sun is kind of the thing that does that. I mean, sunny days is literally being able to see the sun. Overcast is when you can't see the sun. Rain is when the sun has evaporated all the water. Everything in weather is a result of the sun, so you should be working with the sun. Now, do I have any particular rituals for doing this in normal ceremonial magic? Not really. Usually you would just do that and you would do a statement of intent, and that is a natural byproduct. Now, when you're doing particularly intense magic, sometimes the weather will change around your local environment because that's just what it's going to do. If you were invoking Saturn and the sun in a ritual, you might call down the thunderstorms to guarantee you have the authority, and when you speak, your voice will conjure the lightning. This is something that I've experienced and Frederick Xavier has mentioned on his channel as well. However, there is another thing that you can do that guarantees weather effects as a byproduct. And this is where I have to make a little bit of a disclaimer. Never do what I am about to describe in this video. I am putting it here for educational purposes only. I do not want anyone to do this and then be amazed or concerned about the effects of what I am about to describe. And I'm going to describe this with a story. A few years ago, a friend of mine wanted to do some experiments with conjuring various different elementals using different god names. For those of you who don't know, god names are what is used to invoke different forces into your ritual space. And for the particular spirits he was working with air spirits at the time, and he wanted to experiment with invoking them using different elemental god names. Now, there are a couple different elemental god names. There's more than one, obviously, but the Golden Dawn uses one primarily, and they're all Hebrew. He wanted to experiment using Enochian god names. And he did so, and it created a massive windstorm at his house. And I wanted to replicate this experiment a couple months ago at the time of recording. However, I did not use the element of air as he did. I used the element of water. Now, I did this, and I didn't really think about it. I was trying to do some experiments with the Enochian god names, and when I invoked the element of water, everything was much more clear. And my intention was not to change the weather, so why are we talking about it? Well, the ensuing elemental disruption from invoking that much elemental water caused it to snow for 3 days at the beginning of March, when it had not been reported on the news at all. So it was a massive freak snowstorm that dissipated and melted almost immediately into water. Now, why is this important and why am I mentioning this? Creating a elementally unstable mixture in your local environment is one of the reasons you banish. And if you are invoking using elemental power, using Enochian god names, it can disrupt the elemental balance so much that it will cause you to have problems. Now, I would highly advise no one to do this. I would highly advise everyone refrain from doing this at all. But I am putting it here to explain that elemental unbalancing is incredibly dangerous, and this is why we don't do it. And I am not responsible for anything that you decide to do with this information. And the, of course, best way to do weather magic is to just visualize with full senses that it is the weather conditions that you are looking for and the weather patterns that you are looking for. If you are looking for a sunny day, just imagine it being a sunny day, and usually within a couple of days it will happen. This is the easiest, most effective, and safest way of doing weather magic, though it is the least flashy. So, that being said, hopefully everyone learned something. I have been Dave, the Amateur Magus. Hope everyone is having a good day. If you're not having a good day, hope your day gets better. Take it easy, take care. See you next time.